Imagine being accused of racism, then start accusing the school for racist bullying. Now, we focused on bullying a lot of times throughout the 6 years of this broadcast. And it's also one of my goals to stop bullying, speak up, inspired by Cartoon Network. And this happened over 2 years ago. Now there's latest developments in this. Take a look.
Fellas, I didn't.
When the Kemp family moved to Lubbock, Texas 2 years ago, they knew that sending their son Brady to a new school might come with some challenges, but nothing prepared him, his mom Tracy, or stepdad Seth for what they were about to endure.
We feel singled out. We feel the racism here.
I just feel like it's blatant incompetence from the schools.
Over the last 2 school years, Brady Kemp and at least 9 other black children say they have been suffering from constant racial harassment. They hear classmates call them monkeys. Some students play sounds on their cell phones that mimic the crack of a whip.
I feel like I get looked down at.
How often would you say you heard the N-word?
It's an everyday thing.
Last spring, someone created an Instagram featuring the school's logo, encouraging classmates to send photos of monkeys. His mother was shocked to see a post of her son.
We watched him change, like his mood. Not wanting to go to school, being sad.
Parents brought their concerns to the Lubbock Cooper School District, but 8 months later, they say they've never received an update and that white students keep taunting their kids. Without local action, they felt they had no choice but to turn to the federal government. This week, lawyers filed joint complaints, alleging that administrators in Lubbock and neighboring Slayton, Texas, violated the civil rights of their students by failing to prevent and respond to racial bullying. Attorney Paige Duggins-Clay represents the families.
The parents in these complaints and the students, they're not asking for money. All they're asking is for equal treatment under the law.
Keith Bryant, the district superintendent, says the school has taken appropriate action and that staff are trained to report bullying. Do you believe there's racism here in Lubbock Cooper?
I believe that there is. Do I think our society is racist? Absolutely. Do I think it spills over in the schools? I will certainly say it can. We work really hard to try to mitigate that. There is no place in Lubbock Cooper ISD for racism in any form or fashion.
Bryant says the investigation into the racist Instagram account remains open.
They talked to hundreds of kids and never found out exactly who it was. I was frustrated about that. I sought the help of the FBI behind the scenes.
You interviewed hundreds of people, but none of the black students whose faces were posted on that Instagram page say that they were interviewed.
Well, I can't speak to that because the administration at that campus did that.
Monday night, families arrived to a school board meeting wearing all black.
We will not quit. We simply will not go away.
Their hope is that the federal government, which can withhold funds from schools that violate the law, will intervene. For Brady, he plans to spend the next few months focused on getting good grades. Next fall, his family hopes to move to a new town. Still, Brady has a message for the classmates he'll leave behind.
I bleed the same blood as you do. We do the same classes together, and you still treat me differently because I'm darker than you. Why?
Antonia Hilton, NBC News, Lubbock, Texas.
I really hope that this family can move to Corpus. Great town, great community here in Fog Bluff. Great athletic programs. Really a great place to raise a family. Great community ever, but there's still vagrants out there. But I'm sure that they can think of something. And if not, I respect their decision. If the family's watching. Okay. But now here's my take on this. First of all, there is a lot of racism happening in our schools. And another thing, sometimes schools get involved in it. Sometimes schools just simply sweep it under the rug and no one cares. But in this case right here, I'm glad the family hired an attorney and started suing them for racist bullying. Now, when you're dealing with racist bullying, what you obviously are dealing with here are people who just It's just people who just say racial things and play sounds of the whip. I mean, listen, we are all created equally. Blacks and whites mix. Are we going back to the 1960s before Martin Luther King said, "I have a dream"? Are we going back to where Rosa Parks sat in the front and refused to sit in the back? Are we going back to where we white people had to use white restrooms and black people had to use black restrooms? Are we going back to where blacks are being pulled over by white police officers? We're not doing that. Listen, we are all created equally, no matter what. Whether you like the person, whether you don't like the person, whether you don't agree, whether you agree with me or disagree with me, we are all created equal no matter what. No matter what. And if you think, because if I called a black person the N-word, they would beat the crap out of me. If I did that, they would beat the crap out of me. Depending on who I would say it to. Which brings us to our next issue. Racism is still happening in schools, and coming up next, several years ago, a teacher calls a student the N-word. And I watched it several times, and I'm like, okay. This is very similar to the Boondocks. We'll play that news clip, and we'll play a clip from the Boondocks. And then later on, being attacked by a grizzly bear. The hunters tell their sides of the story as they were attacked by a over 5-foot grizzly bear. Stay with us. Tonight we're talking about racist bullying in our schools. Now, I should have focused this when we did our National Bullying Month, but this is just way over the line because earlier we showed you a story about a family in Lubbock who now sued the district for not handling it properly. And I'm glad that steps are being taken. Let's take it back now to years ago to where, let me ask you a question. As a black, let me ask you guys something. How would you feel saying the N-word to a black student if you're a teacher? That's exactly what happened years ago. Years ago, a teacher was suspended for calling a student the N-word. Now, this is very similar. I've watched this several times, and what I did, I was stunned that he would say that. Say that to her. He said the full word. Well, he said, well, he was just being trained to do so. Do you think he was being trained to do so? Before we play this, I'm not racist. It's an issue that's still going on for many years, and it needs to stop.
And what did he say specifically to you?
Sit down, nigga.
Keyshawn Chambers is a freshman at Valley High School, a Boy Scout, a football player, a member of the ROTC, an honor roll student. He was hanging around his teacher's classroom door in December. The teacher told him to sit down, and the teacher says that Keyshawn used the N-word first.
And I just kind of was stunned a second. Well, then get away from the door, nigga. And I repeated the same insult because that's sort of what I've been trained to do.
The school district says that is not what they trained English teacher Paul Dawson to do.
He tried to say I said it, and I didn't say it, and no one else in the class knows that I said it because I didn't.
Documents from the school investigation show that several of the students interviewed from Valley did not hear Keyshawn say the N-word first. Dawson says that students use the slang version of the N-word at Valley High School all the time. He says N-I-G-G-E-R is a racial slur, but says that students use N-I-G-G-A as often as they'd say dude or hey man. And Dawson says as much as he does not like the word, he still used the slang version to feel more comfortable with black students.
Why is this word used so frequently? So I just don't understand it. And I'm trying to understand it. I need help. Yes, I use nigga. I've used it. I admit it. I put the H on it to emphasize it's nigga. You know, nigga this, nigga please, nigga, you know, can you lend a nigga a pencil?
What kind of example are you setting for your students if you use a word that you don't want them to use?
Upon reflection, that's not good.
Dawson was suspended for 10 days without pay from January 9th to January 23rd, and he has to go to diversity training. He says that he's learned from this experience and hopes that others think twice before using the N-word.
I will never say any form of nigga. You know, I'm cured of that.
Paul Dawson says that he is sorry for the way things were handled, but Keyshawn says that he is not looking for any apologies.
Apologizing is going to change the fact that it happened and he's not been punished.
And punishment in your mind is?
Him not having his job anymore.
Paul Dawson says that he wants there to be a steadfast policy in Jefferson County Public Schools against people using the N-word. Right now, when it is brought up, it's dealt with on a case-by-case basis with the district. And we should mention that Keyshawn is still in Paul Dawson's classroom. Dawson has been with the district for 20 years, and Keyshawn is still in that classroom because Dawson is an honors English teacher. There are very few honors English classes, so he is still with him.
Well, now he was suspended for a while, but is he back teaching?
He is back teaching now, and he still does have his job. But this is not the first time that Paul Dawson has been suspended from Jefferson County Public Schools. Coming up at 5:30, we'll tell you what happened before. We'll tell you about his plan to appeal the suspension and why the district says that he should keep his job. Thank you very much. I'm sure we haven't heard the last of this. Oh, no, lots more to come. Thank you.
There was still lots more to come. Now the clip from the Boondocks. Now, again, if you don't know, it's an old show on Adult Swim, dealing with racial issues, this and this. And if you noticed, I was like smiling a lot because it kind of makes me laugh when we white people say the N-word. Now, I'm not even going to go into detail here because this is TMI. But let's take a look at this clip.
It's a derogatory racial remark that has divided people for many years.
And a J. Edgar Hoover elementary teacher has now been suspended over calling a student the N-word. Stacey Renee investigates what happened and why.
And what did he say specifically to you?
He said, "Sit down, nigga."
Riley Freeman is a third-grade student at J. Edgar Hoover Elementary School. He's a basketball player, an avid reader, and one day hopes to spread his philosophy through rap music. He was in class when he had a verbal exchange with his teacher, Joe Petto. But Mr. Petto said it was Riley who used the N-word first.
So I told him to take his seat, and here comes this barrage of insults. I mean, some of the words I've never even heard before, and I was just stunned. And I said, "Well, sit down, nigga." I just repeated the insult back to him because that's what I've been trained to do.
That is not what he's been trained to do.
School Superintendent Donald Richards says all teachers are taught to use appropriate hyphenated euphemisms instead of racial slurs.
We have a very strict policy against teachers using the N-word or any other racially insensitive words. The district's policy is that teachers should always say N-word instead of the actual N-word, or S-word instead of saying the actual S-word.
What is the S-word?
Well, I don't want to say it, but...
Spick?
No. Spear chucker.
Spear chucker?
Yes. See, we would encourage our teachers to say S-word instead of spear chucker.
And how often do you have a problem with faculty saying spear chucker to students?
We don't. That's what I'm saying. They would say S-word.
But Riley Freeman denies he used the N-word first.
He said, "I used the word before, but I didn't. I wouldn't use that word ever. That word hurts people."
Mr. Petto claims the version of nigger, ending in ger, is the racial slur, but that he was using a different version of the word ending in ga, that means the same as buddy or best pal. He insists that he was using the friendly version of the N-word to better relate to Riley.
I used the word. I admit it. I thought there was a difference between nigger and nigga. I thought I understood this whole thing, but I guess I don't. I need help. Whenever I hear the rappers, they say, nigga. It's gets in all the music. Look. Rap songs that use the word nigga in a positive way. There's tons of them. Look, real nigga roll call. Niggas bleed. Jigga my nigga. Niggas for life. Real niggas don't die. Shame on a nigga. Suck a nigga. Ain't no nigga.
The school is investigating the incident, but in the meantime, Mr. Petto has been put on unpaid leave.
I just couldn't believe it because nobody ever called me a nigga before.
And how did it make you feel?
Like I was less than a person.
Now do you get the difference here? And now you see why I kind of laughed? Because it was animated. It was... I try to control them. I'm still controlling it to this day. So I'm under control here. So I don't want you guys thinking that it's funny or not. But this is just a racial issue. And again, if I said an N-word, if I said the N-word to a black person, they beat the crap out of me. And depending on who I said it to, I'm still controlling the grin here. So try to bear with me here. I'm trying my best to not go into racial issues. But the only reason I'm doing this racial bullying is basically because of a story I saw. Don't put yourself in a position of me saying to me, well, you're racist, this and this, you think it's funny. I'm sorry. Okay? I'm sorry. Imagine being attacked by a big old grizzly bear. Like this. Coming up, a story of hunters who became the hunted. Keith Morrison with The Night of the Grizzly. Stay with us. There's now more evidence into the Oxford, Michigan school shooting that led to more evidence against Jennifer Crumley, the mother of Ethan. According to CNN, prosecutors in Michigan disclosed more evidence in recent court filings that say shows the mother of Oxford school shooter Ethan Crumley knew about his unhealthy mental state when the parents brought him a gun last November. She said, you know, my biggest fear was when he was going to turn the gun on himself. That quote was included in the filing from Auckland with the prosecutor Karen McDonald, who had opposed the parents' latest effort to appeal their bond over a year. The filing stemmed from mass shootings at Oxford High, in which Ethan Crumley, 15 at the time, killed 4 students and injured 6 students and a teacher at high school. He pled guilty in October. An unusual move, the prosecutors arrested his parents, accused them of giving their son easy access to a firearm. Now the parents are saying they don't have flight risk. Prosecutors entered some evidence in the case at a preliminary hearing in February, which after a judge ruled there was enough evidence to proceed to a trial in January of 2023, which is a month ahead. The bond is set at $500,000, but last week they filed a motion asking the court to set lower bonds or release them on electronic supervision. The couple wrote they never tried to flee into several days, but they tried to turn themselves in. But the Oakland County Circuit Judge ruled in order Tuesday that she does not have the jurisdiction to rule on the bond issue because of the pending appeal. The parties in the case are under gag order, unable to communicate with the press. So, in my case here, they got him the gun. They fled, and now they're turning themselves in. So now we'll know. Now we know what happened. And in Uvalde, there is now new evidence into that shooting. Remember the tapes? Remember the tapes? 2 Uvalde officers facing increased scrutiny in school shooting response, according to CNN. Texas investigators who are reviewing the police response in a deadly school shooting in Uvalde in May are increasingly scrutinizing the actions of 2 former officials. They reported on Thursday. But we know that Pete Arnona was fired, and now the investigators are being investigated. The officers are being investigated, so we'll keep posted what's been going on. But when we come back, the night of the Grizzly, the sides of the story from all the hunters. Stay with us. Can you ever imagine going face to face with a half-ton grizzly? It happened to one teenager in Montana. You're also about to meet the hunters who share their story of what happened. Here's Keith Morrison with the Night of the Grizzly, tonight's Dateline Survivor Story.
Why don't you tell them the story? About Bloodhead Fred? Yeah.
They trade tales in their magic night circle, bring comfort to the cold and dark. They've come here to draw the sting from their own terrible story. The one that begins in a small town in eastern Montana, a speck on the map called Broadus. They say you have to be tough to grow up in Broadus, a town where the winters are harsh and livings are made on muscle and sweat. Get up here. Kurt Olson planned to break from this hard work of his, a special vacation with his son who had just graduated high school.
This trip was going to be one that we was going to remember forever, and boy, I tell you what, we sure did. Never forget that hunting trip.
What made it so memorable? Kurt Olson invited some friends, sheep-shearing buddies, including an avid young outdoorsman, 18-year-old Bram Schaefer, and his father, Dennis, who was in for far more than the simple pleasures he expected.
We talk and tell stories and build fires and just enjoy life.
This is where they came. Horseshoe Mountain, a glorious place deep in the Absaroka-Beartooth wilderness, a world away from civilization or even a paved road. They came to hunt elk and absorb the perfect quiet, but mostly to pause here together before the sons went on with their lives.
It was different than anything for me because we were taking our sons. You know, I mean, a guy waits to take his son on a trip like this once in a lifetime.
And here it is almost indescribably beautiful, spiritual, still unscarred by its human visitors, and blooming with new life 8 years after the great Yellowstone fire. They knew, of course, that though man intrudes here as everywhere, the real king of the beasts in these forests is the grizzly bear. 400 to 1,000 pounds of ferocious power, 35 miles an hour, could kill a horse with a single blow. Jaws so powerful, could snap through a tree like that in a single bite. They knew this and were prepared, but no one could know what would happen.
We knew there was grizzlies. I knew there was grizzlies in there.
There are perhaps 1,000 grizzly bears in Montana, like these in Yellowstone. They're omnivorous. They'll eat practically anything. For the most part, they're afraid of humans. But when they feel threatened, they lash out, sometimes with grave consequences. Grizzlies can outrun any human and are so strong they can carry away a 1,000-pound elk. But the hunters weren't worried. Why would they be? You're more likely to be struck by lightning than be attacked by a grizzly bear. Besides, their trip seemed blessed.
We got off to a very good start. We had a wonderful hunt, had wonderful weather.
About 4 o'clock Tuesday afternoon, they came here to Paradise to take one last shot at an elk before heading home. They fanned out from this meadow, each heading off in a different direction.
I know from past experiences I should have had us paired up, you know, right within 30 feet, you know, and that was a big mistake.
Kurt sent Bram over there, over the top of the ridge. Bram's father, Dennis, took a shorter route back to camp.
In fact, one of the last things Bram did was he turned and smiled at me and then turned and over the mountain he went, hunting.
They all knew they were pushing the limit. It was late in the day to be starting a hunt. Then, as darkness fell, the weather took a sharp turn. It started to rain. The temperature plunged. One by one, the hunters, now cold and soaked to the skin, returned to camp. But no Bram. He was the quickest walker, so they were surprised, then concerned. By the time Dennis straggled in last, he was greeted by rising panic.
Bram wasn't in yet. And I said, "What's going on here, guys? Bram's not in. Everybody else is in, and Bram's not in." And I knew there was something wrong. And by the time I got my horse saddled, it was snowing.
Kurt and the rest of the hunters waited in camp. They knew that even if Bram had survived some disaster, the weather could kill him.
My guts churned. I prayed. Mostly I prayed to give me a chance to find him alive. I wanted the chance.
But you felt responsible for him.
I was. I sent him around the mountain. I was responsible.
And now the storm was getting much worse. The rain had turned to sleet, and then snow. Snow so thick, Dennis was forced to return to camp without his youngest son.
I spent the night pacing and walking. I thought about the fact that I'd taken one of our children up on the mountain, and maybe I wasn't going to bring him home.
As the hunters waited and prayed by the fire, two men they'd never met were on their way back to their own camp on the other side of the mountain.
I said, Bryce, you know, this would be a great time to see how these muzzle loaders work.
Bruce Pisecki and his son were late getting back to their camp when they stopped to see if their old-fashioned guns would fire in the foul weather. Bruce showed us how.
And it was like minutes, maybe seconds later, we heard a shot up in the woods.
Bruce, thinking the shot was fired by another hunter in his party, walked toward the gunshot. And what he heard then was chilling.
It was frantic yelling. It wasn't just somebody saying, hello, I'm over here.
What did you hear? What did he yell?
Well, the last time we could hear him and understand him, he said, help me, I've been attacked by a grizzly bear. And I just chilled.
It was Bram, or what was left of him.
He almost looked like a monster. I mean, he just looked like something I've never seen before. There was so much steam coming off of him, and he was standing there about like this, just doing this. And he had so much blood down in front of his face. When he was talking, the bubbles were coming out of his mouth.
Bram's scalp was torn to the bone, his arm and shoulder ripped, his hand a punctured claw. But worst, the flesh of his left thigh had been shredded. He was tottering, incoherent, and he reeked the foul smell of Grizzly. Bruce decided to try to carry him to camp. This was Herculean. The forest floor was a tangled trap of trees felled by the great fire.
Couldn't have been on the worst night. And every time I'd lift my leg to carry him over a tree that had been falling down, my legs would split out from underneath me because of the weight. I even had my buckles snap on my boots because I had so much weight on my back.
As Bruce and Bram were struggling down the mountain, a doctor who happened to be camped in the meadow below heard their shots. On the side of this mountain, in the middle of nowhere, was Dr. Andy Wolf, a podiatrist who had trained in an urban trauma unit.
We grabbed some slickers and some lanterns, some flashlights, and a medical kit, and went up on the hill. And our pistols as well.
And what they found there was a horror.
This right here is where we found him. Bram was standing at that time, looked real cold, he was shivering, and covered from head to toe with blood.
When you saw what that leg looked like, what do you think?
I was really concerned, but I tried to tell Bram that everything was fine, and he was a little shocked. He was real shivering bad, and he was beginning to get a little shocky.
Back at camp, the doctor gave Bram a narcotic to dull the pain and search for something to bind Bram's wounds. He had little more than burlap and duct tape. He used it. Two other hunters were sent plowing through the snow to the ranger station. Dr. Wolf tried to keep Bram from going into shock. He watched with growing despair as signs of gangrene began to appear. It can travel 6 inches an hour, destroying tissue as it rolls through the body. But an even more urgent problem was throbbing visibly in Bram's thigh. The main artery was exposed, perhaps damaged. If it broke, Bram would be dead in minutes.
Do you think you were dealing with a dead man at this point?
I thought if that artery busted open, we were in deep trouble.
On the other side of the mountain, Bram's family and friends still didn't know where he was, or whether he was dead or alive.
We held each other, we cried, we prayed.
At daybreak, they set out again to try to find Bram. Soon after the search began, Kurt ran into the two men who had ridden through the night to find the ranger.
They said, we have Bram. And I wept like a child. I mean, that was, to me, I'll never forget it. I reached over and I grabbed that guy off his horse and I kissed him.
Then he signaled Bram's father.
And we heard the 4 shots from Kurt and waited 20 seconds and the 5th shot.
Which meant he'd been found.
I was so relieved. We all yahooed, and we scattered rocks as we went down the mountain on our horses.
We knew it was going to be bad. How bad, we didn't know until we hit the bottom of the switchbacks that day. And they gave us his clothes. And they were just mangled to bits.
Just said, oh my God.
Dennis wasn't able to see his son before a chopper finally picked him up from this meadow that morning. His wife was at home when the phone rang.
Of all the calls that you get about your children, I couldn't fathom that one of my children was just lunch for a bear. It was too hard.
Cheryl Schaefer flew 2.5 hours down the highway to Billings St. Vincent Hospital, where she was met by a doctor.
He said, your son has gastrous gangrene, and I just kind of grabbed his hands and I said, no, I don't think so. And he said that this is a really bad infection that moves really fast and that Bram's been too long out in the mountain without help. And he told me that he was going to go into surgery, but not to...
Not to what?
Not to hold any hope because he can come out.
Wow. When we come back, will the teenagers survive that infection? You're about to see what happens as Keith Morrison brings us the conclusion to the night of the Grizzly. Stone?
An eyewitness account of the attack and young Bram's fight for life when we return. After these...
Stay with us. Young Bram just wandered into the forest doing a little hunting when all of a sudden a half-ton grizzly bear slashed him open. Hunters found him. A doctor there try to save him. But will he survive in that hospital? Once again, here's Keith Morrison.
I didn't want him to know how bad he was. And he took one look at me and he says, "Don't start with me, Mother. I have things to do." I said, "Okay." And I think from then on I thought, okay.
But Bram was in very bad shape. Doctors were able to close his head wound and repair the football-sized bite the bear had taken from under his arm. But the mangled leg with its galloping gangrene was a critical problem. Doctors warned the Schaefers that if Bram survived at all, he'd likely lose his leg.
I knew that he was a fighter. He always has been a fighter.
Bram survived the surgery, but the infection was still roaring through his body. So he was placed inside this hyperbaric chamber to try to kill the gangrene. It seemed to be working, but suddenly his heart rate plunged. He lost consciousness. The pure oxygen that was being used to heal his leg was making him critically ill.
They had to stick him back in, and but he had a bad night.
But something kept him going that night. The cussed toughness bred in rugged eastern Montana? Maybe. Or maybe his mother, standing by.
I looked at him and I thought, no, you're not dying in no oxygen chamber. So I just kissed him and I said goodnight.
Bram Schaefer survived the bear, the mountain, the storm, gangrene, and oxygen toxicity. And after 3 surgeries, skin grafts, weeks in the hospital, he went home, his leg intact. And he told us the part of the story that only he could tell, harrowing moments that went beyond terror and extraordinary survival.
I just think maybe if I stayed in bed like I wanted to, I wouldn't have had to go. I wouldn't have gotten in trouble.
If you stayed in bed like you wanted to?
Yeah, we were taking an afternoon nap, and Kurt come over and kicked the side of the tent. "You going with us?" "Oh, all right, you know."
Think of the adventure you would have missed.
Yeah. Could have done without it.
What he can now call his adventure began about an hour after he and the other hunters fanned out from the top of Horseshoe Mountain. Bram was walking through the woods, alone, his gun at his side, looking for sign of elk. He hadn't shot a thing when suddenly the silence was broken by the sound of snapping branches.
I was just looking down at the ground, and I look up, and I didn't focus or anything, and I see a big blurry thing and a little blurry thing charging toward me.
Bram knew right away what those blurs were, even though he'd never seen a grizzly before. Now, without the hint of a warning, he was being attacked by one of the most dangerous animals on the planet, a mother bear protecting her young cub.
I took about 4 steps and she nailed me. The next thing I know, she's got her head between my legs, looking at me, just breathing.
Female grizzlies weigh close to 400 pounds and have 4-inch claws that slash with incredible force. Some advice: if a bear attacks, the best thing to do is curl into a ball and play dead. Bram didn't know this. His brain was spinning, adrenaline pumping. He was pinned under the weight of the panting bear.
Then what happened?
I punched her.
You punched the bear?
Yeah, well, I couldn't think of anything else to do, so I socked her one in the nose. Then
where was your gun?
She was sitting on it. I just kind of laid back down, and she grabbed my leg, started shaking me around. You know, and I'm moving all over the place.
Grabbed your leg with her teeth.
Yeah. It didn't hurt, really. I felt the teeth go in. You know, it's like more of a sound than a feeling.
After biting, slashing, and shaking Bram like a rag doll, the bear got up and walked away, apparently to check on her cub.
She was circling around staring at me, and I looked at my gun, and I just kind of rolled over and grabbed it, turned, and she was coming back for me, and I shot her.
The bear collapsed. She appeared to be dead. Bram struggled to his feet and looked at his wounds. Even though the attack lasted just seconds, the damage to Bram's body was horrendous.
I looked at my leg, and, you know, it just looked like, I don't know, little cube steaks and stuff hanging out in my pants. And for a minute, I was standing there, and I'm thinking, where's my hat? Where's your hat? I was worried about my hat. I wanted to go get my hat. But it was over by the bear, so I figured I'd leave it there.
Seriously wounded and bleeding, knowing if he sat down he'd never get up, Bram started walking, climbing over deadfall and through mud bogs as darkness fell and the weather turned cruel. He had 9 bullets left after shooting the bear, 9 chances to make some noise, get someone's attention.
I was mad because nobody was coming. I was mad because I had to keep walking. I just kept thinking in my mind, can they make it any worse?
But you had a will to survive, was pretty strong.
Yeah.
Cussedness.
Yeah, I guess. Didn't like the idea of dying on a mountain.
He was bleeding heavily, in unimaginable pain, cursing the bear and the wind and the snow. He stumbled through the woods for about 2 hours. He was down to his last 2 bullets. Then he heard Bruce Pisecki fire that muzzle loader.
My heart just leapt, you know. I'm like, oh boy, somebody's here. I stopped, and I stood there and waited, and I started getting really cold. I started shaking. I started feeling weak, stiffened up, and then when he threw me over his shoulder, it made me dizzy because, you know, all my blood's rushing to the top of my head.
Did you ever know the doctors at one point didn't think you were going to make it?
I had a feeling that that's what they were thinking, but they didn't tell me that.
And just months after the mauling, we watched this young man carry a newborn calf across a pen at the family ranch without so much as a limp.
What has all of this done to you as a family?
I'm driving Bram crazy. Because I just like to have him around and talk to him, and I kind of tend to dote on him.
We brought the Schaefers back to Horseshoe Mountain last August.
Hi, Dad.
And some of the rescuers came too.
Put your leg up. See, I feel doing pretty darn good. How's your daughter?
It was a chance to show off some wicked scars.
If he wasn't 18 years old, I don't know that he would have bent as well as he did without breaking.
And a grizzly tattoo.
Oh, brave man.
Last fall, they were strangers. Now their bond is as strong as any family. For life, they tell us.
I feel honored that they'd let us in to be their friends. I think they're heroes. They're exceptional people.
I don't think
his parents believe it was Bram's stubbornness, the kindness of a few strangers, and a heavy dose of fate that saved his life.
It didn't just happen that way. It was meant to be that way.
Do you really believe that?
I really believe that. It wasn't his time. Too many people were in the right place at the right time.
The hunters who helped him agreed.
I know there was somebody watching over everybody that night. No doubt.
I believe that angels are just ordinary people and they don't have wings. They just happen to be where they need to be when they need to be there.
Grizzly bear attacks on humans are extremely rare. On average, grizzlies are responsible for 1 human death per year worldwide. If you're traveling in bear country, experts suggest making as much noise as possible. Bears generally try to avoid humans if they know you're coming.
Agreed. So the next time you go into Montana and you see a grizzly bear, don't punch him in the nose. Curl them all and play dead while making much noise. The bear won't know. Even Coda won't even know. Maybe Kenine. Yeah, Kenine won't even attack you if you make too much noise. More to come. Stay with us. Here's a preview I got for you coming up on Give Me a Break Saturday.
A story that electrified the world.
You're completely doomed. It's cold. You're thirsty. There's no food. There's nothing.
Surrounded by miles of snow in some of the world's highest mountains, fighting the elements and their fears.
You see your friend die, and then something changed inside you.
In a Dateline exclusive, the incredible struggle from those who lived through it, tested as few have been tested before.
It's a battle between your starving and your body is asking you for food and your revulsion.
Who would make it home? And what would happen when the world discovered what they were forced to do to survive?
I don't even expect them to understand me. I only expect them to know the truth.
There were certain Keith Morrison with the latest in an extraordinary story of courage. A Dateline Survivor Special.
That's on Saturday. Before we wrap it up, I should point out that Grizzly Bear story we saw, I have it. It's right here. Bear attack from Deadly Encounters. Dateline Survivor Stories. New video. Alone in the wilds of Montana, a teenage boy on a family hunting trip becomes hunted in a horrifying close encounter with an enraged bear. Now, I have all three of these, and probably in the near future, I'm going to play you, probably in the near future, I'm going to leave one of the 5 stories. From it, like Round Zero from Chris Hansen, Deadly Skies from Mike Betcher, one from John Scott, probably, and this one's probably from Mike Betcher, Lynn Cannon, and Keith Morrison. I'll probably play his brother's keeper when a 10-year-old autistic boy was trapped in a 12-story high-tension tower. His little brother risked his own life to save him. I really hope that shares with you guys. So that's probably in the near future. That's Give Me a Break for this Friday. Going to Saturday. We'll see you again at Give Me a Break Saturday. For all of us here at YouTube at Give Me a Break, we've had a great day, and you have a good night.